Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about who can actually win the national title. The blue chip breakdown has been a very interesting thing to watch over the last couple of years because there's been a couple of teams that have gotten very, very close to possibly spoiling that moniker of 50% to win the national title. And two of those teams I want to talk about right now is Washington and TCU. And they were really, really magical the last couple of seasons. I think everyone can agree when we were watching those two teams over the last little bit, it was really hard not to root for them, frankly. It was really hard not to say, this is the team that I, want to see win. Frankly, there were a couple of games that I didn't want to see them win, especially that UGA national title against TCU, because being a UGA grad, I can't have that. But the reality is, these were very, very fun teams and very easy to root for. But the cool thing about them was they were nowhere near the 50% moniker. It wasn't like they were, right on the doorstep like Florida State is this year. They're very far back, and it's a very interesting thing to watch, and it's something that could happen this year. Who knows what happens. I want to start with TCU a little bit here, and when you talk about TCU in 2022, it was an absolutely magical run. Sonny Dykes came into the season with not even the starter that took them to the playoff and got a Heisman finalist invite to New York City in Max Duggan. So it was a crazy season for TCU, but the amount of games they won by one possession, by 3 points, by 4 points, by 7 points, was just insane throughout that year. And it had a lot to do with the experience on that team, the comfort on that team, but also just the energy they had. It felt like every time they stepped onto the field, no matter who was across from them, they were not scared. And it was a really remarkable thing to watch, especially in that Michigan game in the semifinal. But their blue chip ratio going into that year was 21.5. They were nowhere near it. And frankly, that's just going to be the case for TCU most years. But that is a remarkable thing that they were able to make that type of run. It gives you immense amount of respect of what Sonny Dykes did, because it wasn't like he came into a treasure trove of a remarkable talent. He came into a team that was, good at certain positions and had some guys that absolutely can play some really good football, two of them in that picture right there. But being that far below the talent level that technically it takes to win a national title, at least historically, is pretty remarkable. And then the other team, Washington, had kind of a similar type run. They rode that quarterback that got a Heisman invite. They rode that quarterback to a national title, won a ton of close games, and they were well under the 50% moniker as well, 32.5%. Now, to be totally fair, Michael Penix, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, Roma Dunze, all of them developed into just remarkable players. But it doesn't change that coming out of high school, these were not very highly recruited guys. And they found their way to Washington. Obviously, Penix found his way to Indiana, but there's going to be, some of these type of teams where you have a 60-year quarterback. You have guys that are really deep on in their careers and absolutely have full understanding of how the offense runs and everything in between. And it's just going to work for them. The chemistry, the leadership, whatever it is, it's going to work, and they're going to get their way into the playoff and possibly crash the party the same way these two did the last couple of years. So it was remarkable watching these two. Washington and TCU were high-powered offenses. That's how they went about business. But I feel like this year's crop might be just a little bit different. There's a couple of teams that I think could have high-powered offenses, but when I look at the groups that are the candidates that I'm kind of pointing out, I'm going to do one per conference, so 4 teams here, but I do think there's a couple that are just going to go about business just a little bit differently, but still be very, very successful in the process. And I want to start out in the Big 12 and start with Oklahoma State. This is a team that is going to be running the ball. They're just going to live off running the ball the same way they did really last year. They're going to make very few unforced mistakes. They're not going to get a lot of turnovers. They're not going to get a lot of penalties. And they're just going to win ball games. That's what Mike Gundy does. That's what he's done ever since he's shown up in Stillwater. That's just who he is. Alan Bowman being back at quarterback, I think, is massive for this team. That last year, there were a couple of times that offense was entirely on Ollie Gordon to make everything happen. And the problem with that is not that Ollie Gordon is not capable of doing that, because frankly he is, but you need a pass game to help the run game, the same way you need a run game to help the pass game. They all work in unison, and Ollie Gordon is one of the best players in the country, bar none. There's no question about that. He's behind one of the best offensive lines in the country. There's going to be a heavy run emphasis on this team, but Alan Bowman coming back and at least being able to execute this offense at a really high level, that's going to be the moniker that tells you, is this team going to make a playoff type run, or are they going to have kind of a disappointing season? They return tons of experience at wide receiver and tight end. They do incredible work, and all of those guys know exactly how Alan Bowman throws passes. Alan Bowman knows exactly how those guys get in and out of cuts, and all of that seems pretty trivial. It really matters, and it makes everything just a little bit easier as you go through this process. And then the defense is going to be really solid. It's led by Nick Martin, who's one of the most talented linebackers in the country, and I think overall that defense is going to be really, really good. And really, Mike Gundy, although the offense has been his calling card, over the last couple of years, this defense has developed into a very, very solid one of the best in the conference. So I do expect them to be a really, really good group. Last year was not necessarily the best season for them by any means, but I do think they'll get things back on track and definitely be a team that is not going to be an easy out by any means. But then I want to move over to the Big Ten and talk about Nebraska. I think this is a team that absolutely can play spoiler here, but the reality is, I feel like a lot of the conversation when you talk about Nebraska right now is all around one man, and it's that guy right there, Dylan Raiola. He is someone that he's coming in with the weight of the world on his shoulders. There's no two ways about that. He is the savior of the program. He is the guy that is going to take him back to the spotlight, and there is a lot of pressure in that. But the reality is, he could do it this year. There is a ton in place for him to be successful this year. They return, they're third in the country in returning production. They bring in guys like Jamal Banks from Wake Forest, and Isaiah Nayer from Texas, both absolutely huge for a young quarterback for a number of reasons, but mainly because the dudes just have ridiculous arm length. They have ridiculously strong hands. They have that ability to make a not so good pass look really good by the catch they make. So I think that definitely will help him in kind of digesting this offense. And sometimes when he might make a mistake, it won't be quite as bad. But also, where their money is going to be made is on the defensive side of the ball. There's no two ways about that. There's absolutely going to be a large emphasis on this defense, and it's a really good one. It was the number 11 defense in the country a year ago, and frankly, they're going to be better this year. There's so many guys that I expect to take steps forward, like MJ Sherman. I think Natch Hushmeyer in the middle of that defense is one of the most dominant defensive linemen in the entire conference and maybe in the country, so I really, really do like this defense, and I think they're going to make tons of noise. Bly Hill was a great addition on the back end, so they've done a really, really good job kind of building out this team even more than it has been. Matt Rule has done this at two other schools. He's from year one to year two, there is a very obvious bump in what this guy is capable of, and the reality is Nebraska is not Baylor and it's not Temple. The second-year jump can be seismic. It can be absolutely huge, and it could possibly launch you into the playoffs. So it'll be fascinating to watch that develop. Definitely something I want to see happen possibly because love Dylan Raiola, love this team, and I think they're going to be just so much fun to watch this year. But let's move over to the ACC, and let's talk about Virginia Tech. This is a team that I've talked about a lot. They're one of the teams that I absolutely love going into the season, and it's Kyron Drones is the entire reason. He could have a Max Duggan type of year. He will be starting the first game of the season, don't worry about that, but he is someone that can absolutely take over this upcoming year. Number one in the country in returning production. They return 95% of the production on their offensive side of the ball. That's just insane. Very much unheard of in the transfer portal era. So this is huge for them. Obviously, the ACC, I've talked about it a number of times, is pretty much up for grabs. Whoever wants it the most, whoever plays the best football in certain parts of the season is going to win it. And Virginia Tech has an ability to get in that national conversation because the reality is they don't play a game that I wouldn't pick them in until I think week 9 when they play Miami. And if they go down to Miami undefeated, that is going to be primetime television. That is going to be appointment television, and it is going to just be incredible. I might have to find my way down to Miami to go to that game just because it would just be that incredible. So I think this is a team that can absolutely make some noise this year. And frankly, we'll talk about Kyron Drones in the next segment about maybe another award that he possibly could bring in this upcoming year. But let's move on to the SEC. Kyron Drones right there, just a little tidbit for you. But let's move on to the SEC. and talk about my other favorite team around the country, the Kentucky Wildcats. I love this team, and I think the biggest thing about this team is there's a couple of things that you can point at and be a little bit worried about, but overall, there's one big variable, and it's the biggest variable. It's the quarterback position, which has been the variable there for the last couple of years, but let's just say for a second Brock Vandagriff hits. What if he is the guy that we thought he was coming out of high school, where number one player in the country, 5-star athlete, did incredible things all throughout his high school career? What if that guy is just who he is, and he was just stuck behind two of the best quarterbacks to ever come through Georgia while he was at UGA? So other than that, everything else is strong, really. The O-line is a little bit of a worry, but they can definitely get that together, and Mark Stoops does a great job with that position most of the time. So the wide receiver position with Berrien Brown, Dane Key, Jamori Macklin is going to be really solid. The defense, Deone Walker in the middle of that defensive line, one of the best players in the country. Jamon Dumas-Johnson coming over from Georgia as well, an absolutely huge get. Maxwell Harrison's one of the best coverage corners in the entire country. So they have plenty to go off of, and the reality is, if Brock Vandagriff is the guy, things get really, really interesting in Lexington. A lot of games that you look at now and kind of scoff at and don't think that they can win, they can absolutely win if Brock Vandagriff is the quarterback that I expect him to be and that a lot of people expected him to be coming out of high school. But there's going to be tons of teams to watch. You know, those are just 4 teams that I kind of am circling right now, but there's SMU. There's tons of teams over in the Big 12. Iowa State can absolutely make this type of run. Maybe West Virginia. There's tons of teams that absolutely have this ability because of, you know, the experience that they have, because of some of the talent they have at specific positions, but also just because they're really resilient teams. And I think they have the ability to win those really close games that Washington and TCU have had to win over the last couple of years. So there's going to be something there. There's going to be something like there was in Fort Worth in 2022, in Seattle in 2023. So I don't know if any of these teams can pull it off, but I have a feeling there's going to be one of them, and I don't know which one, but it'll be really fascinating to watch. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to go back into Heisman Watch. We have done every conference. We're going to get into the ACC today, and we're going to talk about the top 5 guys that, as I look at it, and a dark horse to definitely look at, kind of on the outskirts, I suppose, for the Heisman race in the ACC. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that.